back and anyone who wants to has a couple of minutes should go back and watch his high school highlight tapes. You see him at All-Star games, and he's dunking over all these guys that are now currently playing for NBA teams and playing really well. He's a freak athlete. I know I saw him up close and personal. I called the Arizona State's Maroon and Gold game for the Blaze 1330 AM, which is a preseason scrimmage Arizona State has every year. And Goodman looked like, despite not playing basketball for a year, he actually sat out at his junior college, didn't even play. He looked like at the very least, the best athlete on the floor. Doesn't really have a ton of diversity in his game. You don't really expect him to shoot. You don't really expect him to put the ball on the floor and do anything creative, but he's just a bull, and he's a bull with a motor. He makes his way to the basket, and he's honestly one of the more athletic college players I've ever seen in person. There was one play in that game where he was standing with a foot almost out of bounds behind the basket, and he elevated, and if he wasn't fouled, he would have dunked the basketball. And another play where he just posterized the Arizona State freshman Cody Justice. He's a freak of nature athlete, and he was academically ineligible until, fortunately for you guys, this Marquette game. So it's going to be really interesting to see him make his debut. I really want to see how much Coach Stendick plays him. Presumably he's going to come off the bench and only play about half the game, but I'm looking forward to him kind of making his way into a starting lineup and kind of being a menace defensively and on the boards and putting together a couple of highlight reel plays every game. It's certainly going to be a boost for this Arizona State team that kind of seems to need an extra gear to separate from opponents that have the same level of talent as they do.
Well, it's actually very interesting that you mentioned that, because Marquette gets somebody back too for this game. Luke Fisher, he is a transfer from Indiana. He sat out for a semester because of the Big East transfer rules, and now he's back. He's Marquette's only guy above 6'7". Before he comes back in this game for Marquette's first 8 games, they didn't have anybody above 6'7". So he's probably going to play the center role. He's probably going to match up with Eric Jacobson, which should be entertaining to watch. He only played 130 minutes at IU, but in those 130 minutes, he blocked 9% of all shots taken against the Hoosiers, which would have been good enough for top 60 in the country in block ratings. He had an 11% offensive rebound rating. So obviously, he's a rim protector. He can rebound, which are two things that Marquette hasn't had up to this point. But Fisher's problem is that, at least in the small sample size that we've seen him in, is that he gets into foul trouble. In the 130 minutes he played, he averaged almost 5 fouls per 40 minutes, which isn't good at all. So it makes me think that with all the quick guards that Arizona State has, and them obviously knowing that Luke Fisher's really Marquette's only tall guy, they're going to go at him early to try and get him into foul trouble.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see that matchup. I guess there could potentially be some times when presumably he's going to be matched up with Eric Jacobson for the majority of the game, but I'd like to see him and Goodman kind of go at it. They might just cancel each other out as two newcomers, but it's really kind of essential that both these teams kind of need that boost, as you said. I think it sounds from what you're telling me like both players kind of provide something that teams didn't previously had. I know Marquette could have really used him against Wisconsin. That would have been a nice guy to throw at Frank Kaminsky, even for a little bit. And then Arizona State, I think Goodman really provides that extra boost of athleticism that's going to make this team, if not one of the best teams in the Pac-12, kind of a really annoying team to have to play against on a game-to-game basis, just with how good they are defensively. And if you have someone like Savon Goodman at the 4, who's theoretically athletic enough to match up with I'm not sure if he's quite the lateral quickness, but I feel like he could give point guards trouble in short stretches. Arizona State's going to be so versatile on defense, so it's going to be interesting to see which of those two guys kind of has a bigger impact in this game.
If I could just cut in for a second here, one thing that you mentioned that I really want to hit on, because this is a big advantage that Arizona State has, is their versatility and their depth. You know, you can bring Jerry Blakes and Bo Barnes, two fantastic guards off the bench. Jonathan Gillian and Savon Goodman are either going to be coming off the bench, or maybe Goodman will start and Atwood or McKissick will come off the bench. But you guys go 8-9 deep. Marquette only has 9 guys available to play after John Dawson and Deontay Burton left. And of those 9, only 8 are people that either we recruited or that transferred to us. One, Pete Taus, is a walk-on that signed a couple of days ago. So lack of depth is going to be a huge problem for Marquette going forward.
Yeah, that's certainly something Arizona State could take advantage of. Last year, I know I was frustrated going into the season, my high expectations for Arizona State last year, instead of really resting on this relative star power that they had, I kind of thought they were going to be a team that played a ton of guys, and then Herb Sendek kind of was really inconsistent in his rotations and kind of cut off some of the players that I thought were going to be playing, or just played them big minutes one game and then didn't really play them the next. This year, I think they're really doing a better job of taking advantage of the depth. Sendek acknowledges that he doesn't have that one transcendent offensive talent that Carson was on occasion, and kind of needs all of his players. So we're seeing a lot more guys play, and I think long term it's going to have a positive effect on this Arizona State team, particularly on the defensive end with everyone being fresh.
Well, with this kind of depth disparity, what I think we're going to see is that Arizona State's going to try and get out and run early. They're going to look to have an outlet pass after every rebound. They're going to look to go right at Fisher and get him into foul trouble. If they, Marquette needs to slow the game down so that they can give all their starters a chance to recover and sort of store their stamina. If Arizona State effectively gets out and runs on this Marquette team, they could have the entire team completely, sort of gasping for breath by halftime.
Right, I think that's certainly a potential strategy. I know Arizona State has so many kind of physical defenders and guys who are really good ball hawks. They whenever they can, they want to get out on the break. I think kind of transitioning a little bit here, Arizona State's biggest issue on the season has kind of been playing down the competition, even though they've won all the games that I'd say weren't against. They've won all their games against non-AQ teams, but so many of them have been close and came down to like the last 10 minutes or so before you see Arizona State pull away. So I'm really interested to see now that they've, despite that loss to Texas A&M, I'd say for the most part have been playing their best basketball this season, and have a guy in Shaquille McKissick who was expected to be a star player for them and really struggled on the year until their last game. He finished with 20 and 12, I believe, or something like that against Pepperdine. It's going to be interesting to see if Arizona State's kind of hitting their stride a little bit, and they can get both their first road win of the season and I believe their first win of the year over an AQ team.
Well, Marquette's biggest weakness, as long as we're talking about weaknesses, is that the Golden Eagles cannot for the life of them get rebounds. I mean, that part of that's due to their lack of size. Part of that is due to the fact that they switched to a zone defense, which is that becomes a lot harder to box out with. But they are near the bottom of the country in rebounding statistics, and Fisher coming back is going to help that a little. But, he's the only true big man on a team that optimistically has 3 bench players that can play. I mean, I think he'll help a little, but I don't think he'll help much. So if Arizona State can get out and run, get second chance points, and, just essentially run this Marquette team ragged, then I think they stand a good chance at winning. But on the other hand, if the Golden Eagles can sort of slow the game down, kind of work the ball inside a little bit, maybe get a few open 3-pointers, then the opposite is true.
Right. I certainly agree with that this game is going to come down in part to pace, and I think it's partially how well Arizona State's best players kind of play, which I guess kind of seems like a non-answer, but we've seen so much inconsistency from ASU's top talents on the year. Jerry Blakes, I'd say, has actually been the most consistent scorer on this team, and he was projected just to be a backup guard this year. I was bullish on him, and I ended up being proven right in that, but there have been some disappointments from McKissick, not really playing that well from game to game, to Jonathan Gilling, who's been good for the most part, but was kind of a non-factor against Pepperdine. I think if all of Arizona State's top players kind of bring it, I don't see how Marquette can really win this game. Just when you compare the amount of offensive talent these two teams has, Arizona State, I wouldn't, not enough to compete nationally, but they have some really good firepower that I think Marquette kind of lacks, just based on everything we've talked about.
Well, speaking of that firepower, I have Arizona State's season shot chart from shotanalytics.com in front of me, and it shows that 3-point shooting has been a big strength of this Sun Devils team so far, but only from one side. They're shooting 50% on 3-pointers from the right corner, 46% from, what do you call that? The in between the right corner and the top of the key beyond 3-point. I don't want to call it the right wing.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but sort of that in-between zone on the right. They're shooting 46% from there. They're shooting 40% from the middle. So very high percentages when they're going right, but when they're going left on three-pointers, that number drops from 38% from left center and 40% from the left corner. And then going for twos from the left, 38% on the left wing, 34% near the top of the key. So it seems like the strategy for Marquette on defense should be to make this Arizona State team go left.
I think what that's a product of is they have two guys who take really, I'd say like probably more than half of their three-pointers combined in Jonathan Gilling, Bo Barnes, and I guess you could throw Cody Justice in there, and all three are really good shooters. I guess I personally hadn't noticed that, so that's a really good find. I guess they just kind of like that right side. So I think for Marquette, it's just doing their due diligence, and I'm sure with Wojo on the bench, they're going to, and just knowing who the shooters are on this team, because most of the guards on Arizona, most of the point guards, I should say, really can't shoot that well. Jerry Blake's is okay, but he has kind of a long-winded windup, and if you play up on him, he's not going to get that jumper off. Trey Holder's still developing. He's not really a great shooter by any means yet, and Chance Murray can't really shoot all that well either. So I think for Marquette, it's all about knowing the scouting report, knowing who you have to stay on and who you have to play zone. I think if Wojo really wants to get creative, he's going to maybe play a box and one and just have one guy kind of tail either Gilling or Barnes or whichever three-point shooter Arizona State has in the game, and then play a zone on the rest of this Arizona State roster. Personally, if I was an opposing coach, that's kind of how I'd go about attacking them, because I don't think everyone on this team can shoot, and it warrants putting in his zone, because so many of these guys rely on getting to the rim to get points, particularly Shaquille McKissick, who's kind of made a renewed commitment to attacking the basket.
All right, so we are going to talk about the future projections for these teams in a second, but first, what's your prediction for this one?
I'm going to say I know doing a score, particularly with college basketball, is kind of hopeless and ridiculous.
No, you don't need to do a score. Just tell me in general.
I already have myself warmed up.
Okay. We're getting
Arizona State 68, Marquette 59. I think it's a close game. I think Arizona State pulls away once some of their stars start making plays. I think Shaquille McKissick builds on a really superb performance he had last game, continues to attack the basket, and Savon Goodman kind of ignites maybe the 3 or 4 Arizona State fans that'll make the trip to the cold Marquette winter.
It's actually, unfortunately, I was unhappy to see this. It's not going to be that cold in Milwaukee. It's the high for tomorrow's in the low 50s. Really? So Arizona State's actually probably not going to feel too far out of their element, as opposed to what it was for the Wisconsin game. It was 27, 28 degrees with wind chill in the teens. I was standing outside for an hour and a half before that to get into the Bradley Center, and I could no longer feel most of my body by the time I got in. But, that's neither here nor there. But mark that down, folks. Gavin's prediction, ASU 68, Marquette 59. I'm going to go the other way on this one. I've been kind of a critic of Marquette's team over the course of this year. I really didn't think they were going to be that good, but so far this season, they've really surprised me. I mean, they lost one game to Nebraska-Omaha, which they had no business losing, but their other 3 losses, Ohio State, Michigan State, Wisconsin, they were competitive in all of those games. They beat Georgia Tech, they beat Tennessee, so these guys are a little bit more battle-tested than they appear. I think they're going to force some turnovers. I think that they're going to get a few very good possessions. There's going to be some times in the game where they're going to be clanking shots, and that's going to be a little bit infuriating. And I think that's just going to come with the territory for Marquette this season. But ultimately, I think that they survive this one. I'm going Marquette 62, Arizona State 59.
All right, that's fair. I think it's somewhere in that 60s or 50s range. That's where Arizona State's kind of their comfort point as far as scoring has been this season, particularly with Marquette's defense. It should be a close, relatively exciting game regardless.
All right, so let's look into the future for these teams. How do you think Arizona State's going to do once Pac-12 play comes up?
It's going to be interesting for Arizona State. I'm definitely not as bullish as I was earlier in the season, just the way they lost all those close games. And what's been more concerning, I'd say, is the way they played against teams like Colgate, who's projected to finish near the bottom of their conference. Arizona State only won that one by 7. They had their best game of the year against UNLV, winning by 22, and then blew a lead to Texas A&M. Anyways, you're telling me to look forward. I think this is a pretty weak Pac-12, honestly. A lot of these teams lost a lot of players. The 2 teams that really stand out are Utah and Arizona. Utah lost their outstanding freshman forward. His name is eluding me right now. I know his first name is, I believe it's Jacob Poeltl. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry, Utah fans, but they still